What's up, everyone? Matt Gajewski here, back again talking college basketball. And today we are talking the Elite Eight Saturday matchups. We have an awesome doubleheader. Before we get started, I want to thank anyone who has supported the channel, subscribing, liking the video, leaving a comment. It all helps a lot. Even if you just watch for any length of time, watch time is huge for us as well. We are officially 62 subs away from the 1,000 mark. So if you've really taken that time out of your day to subscribe to the channel, it means a lot, and I thank you. And last thing, if you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. You must be 21 or older to play in most areas. We do talk about gambling on the show, so important to say that. Let's kick off the doubleheader. Texas Tech takes on Florida. This game has a 6.5-point spread, and the total in the game is at 156.5. A couple injuries in the game. Chance McMillan did not return for Texas Tech. We thought he was going to in the Sweet 16 matchup. They did not need him. Well, maybe they could have used him, but he was allegedly supposed to play in the game and then didn't feel right in shoot around and warm up, so they held him out. I don't know if we see him here. Alex Condon for Florida went down in the first half with an ankle injury. He was able to return. Effectiveness was a little up in the air, and sometimes it's easier to return day of with adrenaline. We'll see how he recovers. I would tentatively expect both of them to be out there, but this is something you'll definitely need to monitor throughout the day and probably all the way until we see starting lineups, warm-ups, whatever it may be. Let's start with resumes. Florida, to get here, beat Norfolk State, UConn, and Maryland. Honestly, the closest game was their second-round opponent, UConn. Maryland, man, that was a game. Just to get into that, they outshot Maryland, but really where they just beat up on the Terps was on the glass. 42-20, and that was with Condon getting hurt and missing a large portion of the game. Hanlockton got in foul trouble basically immediately. They were using Chenyulu and Thomas Haw, and that was basically still enough to overcome Derek Queen and Julian Reese on the glass. Florida comes in number 2 overall in the country. They're 9-3 against the top 25, beat Tennessee twice, Auburn, Alabama twice, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Missouri, and now Maryland. Their only loss outside the top 25 is to Georgia at 38, a game that Florida honestly had every opportunity to win. They let Georgia get a big lead. Florida crawled all the way back, and then some missed free throws were what decided the game in favor of the Bulldogs. So it's an elite resume for Florida. I guess the only real concerns for them outside of the Condon injury, they had some uncharacteristic turnovers in the last game, and they did foul 22 times. I believe they had 11 first-half turnovers, so finishing with 17. They cleaned that up a little bit. That's at least positive heading into the Elite Eight. Texas Tech's resume, they come in 9th overall in the country. To get here, they beat UNC Wilmington. Drake beat them by 13. And then they just had the overtime game against Arkansas where they cut a deficit. They only shot 25% from 3, but they did out-rebound Arkansas 51-39, which was a big reason why they were able to get back into the game. And they also got some stops in other ways. JT Toppin had a monster game, 20 points, 7 boards, 5 blocks. So his rim protection was awesome. But Arkansas had every opportunity to win that game. Arkansas chose not to foul when they were up 3 points at the very end of the game, giving Texas Tech the opportunity to get the ball to overtime. And then they played iso ball down the stretch, which didn't work. Texas Tech defense, it held up. Outside of that game, Texas Tech went 3-5 against the top 25, beating Arizona, Houston, an amazing road win. And then Kansas, they have 3 losses outside the top 50. They lost to St. Joe's, UCF, and TCU. As far as the stylistics go, the biggest thing in this game is probably going to be the height. And if we see Condon out there, Texas Tech is 212th in effective height, but 36th in rebounding. That's because JT Toppin is a top 30 rebounder in the country, and he does so much for this team on the glass. But even JT Toppin, he's going to be at a disadvantage in this game. Florida just comes at you in waves, and we saw them get tested in their last game. You have Condon, who's 6'11", go down with an injury. All right, Hanlockton comes in at 7'1". He plays for a little bit, gets in foul trouble. No problem. We'll use Chenyulu at 6'10", or Thomas Haw at 6'9". It's just so much to overcome if you're facing this Florida team. They can play with 2 of them on the floor, 1 of them on the floor, because they are deep at guard as well. Just so many ways for them to come at you. So even with Toppin being as good as he is on the glass, it's still hard for me to think that this isn't a big advantage for Florida. As far as the shooting stuff goes, I want to see if Chance McMillan's going to play at all. I mean, he's big for this team. They're they basically have three shooters hitting 38% or more from three. McMillan is one of them. Kerwin Walton, who's not supposed to be a full-time player for this team, earlier in the year when they were fully healthy, he was a role player, just a shooter off the bench. And then Christian Anderson comes with some size limitations. So, yeah, you have three guys that can do it, but having McMillan to at least add to those players would be huge for this team. Overall, Texas Tech is 31st in effective field goal percent, 49th inside, and 30th in three-point percent. We'll see what we get from McMillan. I don't know if he plays. And it's important to be at full strength because Florida is so good on defense. 15th overall, 15th inside, 5th defending the three. Texas Tech's going to shoot a lot of threes regardless. They're 58th in three-point rate. But, man, it's not just the Florida bigs. They have elite defense across the board, including the perimeter. When Florida has the ball, this team is 38th in effective field goal, 26th inside, 75th in three-point percent. Walter Clayton paces that unit with a 38.5% mark from three, but Elijah Martin, Will Richard, even Denzel Aberdeen aren't far behind. They're all hitting at least 35%. Texas Tech has a good defense, but not an elite defense. They don't have a real weakness, but they do come in 34th overall, 63rd inside, 70th in perimeter defense. They're basically good everywhere, not great, whereas Florida has top 15 marks essentially across the board. Florida's going to shoot a lot of threes as well and then rely on their rebounding. They're 73rd in three-point rate, so we'll see if Texas Tech can defend the three. But right now, you're seeing a lot of advantages, some larger than others, but most of them are coming in Florida's direction. As far as turnovers and fouls go, they're about even. Florida does foul a little more often, but they're the deeper team, so they can afford that. I will say Texas Tech does outshoot Florida. They're 47th from the free throw line to Florida's 195th. That's just free throw percentage. So perhaps Florida fouling a lot, if they allow Texas Tech to get into the bonus or something, that could be a problem for them. But overall, it's still a lot of advantages for Florida. And even if you want to give Texas Tech a turnover advantage, given what we saw from Florida in their last game, I'm still not sure it's enough. It is a clash of styles. Texas Tech is 255th in pace, Florida 64th. So perhaps Tech tries to slow down the game, grease it up a little bit. But even that, we're seeing this come in well in favor of the Gators. Currently, we make this slightly inside the minus 5.5. We're looking at about a minus 6.2, 6.25. But stylistically, there's just so much on the floor in favor of the Gators. This is one that's really hard to pass up with them. We'll see where it goes. I would have more interest in Texas Tech if you could guarantee me McMillan's playing, but I don't think he is. And if he shoots up, I'm not sure at what capacity. So it's going to be the Gators or pass for us in this first game. But that'll be in Discord if you're interested. We're still projecting every game, sides, totals, player props, it's rebounds, points, assists, steals, blocks, minutes, you name it. No long-term commitments. You can even just jump in for a week. That is $10. And there are, again, no long-term commitments. A month is available too. In the offseason, we'll certainly be doing a lot for college football, but more on that later. Let's get to our second game of the doubleheader. Alabama takes on Duke. This game has a 7-point spread, 7.5 in some spots in favor of Duke, 173.5 total. The only major injury in the game is Latrell Wrightsell for Alabama. He's been out since November with a torn ACL. Duke got everyone back. Malik Brown played in their last game, only 4 minutes, but that game, the final score looks closer than the actual margin throughout the game indicates. It took a late charge from Arizona to cut it to 7, but more on that in a bit. Where that stands with Malik Brown is he only had to play 4 minutes in the game. They didn't need him out there for much longer. But let's start with the Alabama side. They come in 6th overall in the country in terms of power rankings. They beat Robert Morris in a game that was closer than it should have been. Then they absolutely kicked the snot out of St. Mary's in BYU. They just put up 113 points against BYU in a historic performance. They've hit in that game more threes than any other team in an NCAA tournament. Mark Sears was absolutely flame-throwing from three, but it wasn't just him. Really, that was how the game was decided. Alabama shot a lot more threes, and they hit a lot more. Specifically, the Tide, they went 49% on their 51 three-point attempts. BYU hit 20% of their 30 three-point attempts. You'll trade threes for twos any day if you're Alabama, and that's what happened. Outside of that game, they went 8-7 against the top 25, beating Illinois, Houston, Texas A&M, Kentucky 3 times, Auburn, an elite body of work. They only have one loss outside the top 25, and it came to Oregon by 2 points on a neutral court, who ranks 28th in the country. So just a phenomenal resume. But you're facing Duke, who maybe doesn't have as many high ends because they play in the ACC, but I mean, they have plenty of them themselves. This is the number 1 power ranked team in the country, beat Mount St. Mary's, Baylor, and Arizona to get here. Arizona that ended up being a 100-93 game. Both teams shot the ball well, but Duke really couldn't miss for most of that game. They hit 58% of their threes, 61% from 2. The peripheral stats were mostly close, but favored Duke. I mean, we're talking blocks, fouls, rebounds. Not a huge advantage, but an advantage nonetheless. Outside of this game, Duke is now 4-3 against the top 25. Interestingly, they have 2 wins against Arizona, who's a non-con opponent, beat Auburn and beat Illinois. Basically, your only opportunity for a top 25 win in the ACC was Clemson. And that was one of Duke's 3 losses, all of them in the top 25 to Kentucky, Kansas, and Clemson. The Clemson game was the Cooper Flagg sick game where he slipped on the baseline at the end of the game, which was really competitive. Flagg showed a lot of heart playing through his illness in that game. In this contest, both teams are tall, but they're built a little differently. Alabama's 5th in effective height, 23rd in rebounding. Duke is 10th in effective height, 7th in rebounding. But the difference comes, Duke doesn't have anyone shorter than 6'6", which could pose some issues against Alabama's guards specifically. Mark Sears and Aiden Holloway are both 6'1". They do have some other options like Chris Youngblood, 6'4". It's not just like Sears and Holloway have to play the whole game, but Sears should. I mean, he's going to be on the floor a majority of this contest. He's going to be ceding 5 inches to the shortest Duke, even rotational player. Duke does not really rotate in players shorter than 6'6". Caleb Foster, if he even gets in the game, is 6'5". And from there, Alabama does have some other potential size disadvantages depending on how long Malawach plays at 7'2", because at the 5, you're basically seeing Cliff Amore at 6'11", and then Grant Nelson, Jaron Stevenson are also 6'11", but they don't play your traditional 5 roles. So there's just a lot of ways Duke can construct a height advantage depending on how they want to use their lineup themselves. Even Cooper Flagg has brought the ball up at times. If you play him at point guard, who are you defending at the point? So just a lot of questions. I would say height favors Duke. Shooting-wise, Alabama's going to shoot at the rim. They're going to take a ton of threes. We know this about them. They have 2 mid-range attempts the entire tournament. 11th in effective field goal percent, 3rd in 2-point percent, 109th in 3-point percent. But that's jumped significantly since conference, up to 51st in 3-point percent since January 1. It's not just Sears either. And Sears is having a phenomenal turnaround, I guess, since conference play. He struggled to begin the year, but he's up to 36% since conference play started. Obviously had the nuclear performance in their most recent game against BYU. But it's not just him. Aiden Holloway and Chris Youngblood hitting 42 and 39.5% of their threes. The problem is, and we already mentioned it, it just comes with Duke's length and size. 4th in total defense, 3rd inside, 20th defending the 3. You have just an absolute nightmare in Cooper Flagg who can defend quite literally 1 through 5 at his 6'9" height with his athleticism. I mean, really the one thing we've seen out of Duke recently that put them in a little bit of a scare was when you saw North Carolina get Malawach pulled out of the paint. I don't know if Alabama can do that successfully because you probably need like Cliff Amore to be in the game for defensive purposes. And if that's the case, he's just not a perimeter player. He's more of a back to the basket big, someone they use in like pick and roll. So it's just tough to see this really lining up against Duke. And when Duke has the ball, 5th in effective field goal, 5th in 2-point percent, 16th in 3-point percent. And I mean, this is crazy. Con Knippel, Sion James, Tyrese Proctor, Isaiah Evans, they all hit at least 40% of their threes. Flagg's not far behind. He hits 37.2%. Alabama does play good defense. They're 27th overall, 3rd inside, 20th on the perimeter. They do protect the rim well. They have shown lapses at times. There were points in that BYU game where they weren't back in transition. I'm not sure if Duke is going to try to run against this Alabama team. That's actually something I'm very curious to see because Alabama's first in pace. They're going to run, and very few teams attempt to do that with them. Duke is 270th in pace, but they've sped up recently, and in certain games, they have run the ball a little bit more. Last game against Arizona, they had a little bit of an up-tempo pace to the game, and that finished with nearly 200 combined points. So as you can see, that's something that Duke is comfortable doing in situations. And I mean, scoring is going to be high in this game too. People like to talk about Alabama's 3-point rate. They're 36th in the country at 3-point rate. Duke is 44th. Duke doesn't always shoot the same raw amount of three-pointers, and that's largely a pace-driven stat. This team actually shoots three-pointers at a higher rate than Alabama, which would surprise a lot of people, I'm sure. On the periphery, I mean, if there weren't more advantages for Duke, I mean, we can find some. Turnover margin, that favors Duke, but that's largely just because Alabama's 351st in turnovers forced. They do not force any turnovers. Fouls don't project to play a major role, but both teams have depth. Duke does outrank Alabama 16th to 211th in free throw percentage, so just another advantage Duke. And basically, it's just a lot of advantages for Duke across the board. But at the end of the day, 7 points is a lot to be giving an Alabama team who's going to play with some streakiness that comes when you shoot as many threes as they do. But they've shown an ability to manufacture open threes, a lot of that coming in transition, a lot of that coming through ball screens. I think Duke's going to have more success against that than BYU, but fortunately, we don't need Alabama to win this game. We need them to cover 7.5 points. Right now, I'm seeing a few fleeting 7.5s out there. That's an auto fire for me. I have just 7 right now where I'm living. So we're going to wait on this number, but probably play an Alabama side. If you made me play the 7, I would play it right now. It's just too many points for a game, even with Duke's advantages. The Tide come in as a value against the spread. But those are our 2 games. Thank you guys for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with the latter 2 games. Until then, good luck. We'll see you later.